Hi, I'm Jimmy Aluria with Victory Team Building Group. This video is talking about how to control your effective labor rate and your gross profit per hour. A lot of shops don't understand these numbers. They're calculated in a lot of the softwares nowadays automatically, like in your TechMetric system. They'll give you these effective labor rate numbers, gross profit per hour, gross profit margin. Most people don't even know what the terms are, much less how to control them and to increase them. And these are gauges that need to be used by the shop manager, by the service advisors, by the parts manager, and anybody who's in charge of watching the shop profitability. It's really important that they actually have these numbers down and they understand what they're doing in these numbers. So the first number I want to talk about is just profit margin. Now, there's another video that I have that has this same slideshow, and it goes over in detail the difference between markup and margin. These are all terms that most people don't really understand what the difference is. But what I'll give you here is basically when you say we made 55% gross profit margin, what margin means there is a percentage, okay? If we say we made $55,000 in gross profit, that's dollars. But margin, when you use the word margin, that's a percentage. Now, why is margin important? Well, it's one of the measures that we use when we're pricing our goods and services. Number one, to make sure we're competitive, but also in looking at the overall costs of the organization and what its capability is of production, we can measure what it needs to be based on the capacity of the shop. Now, some shops work on a very high volume operation, and so they can bring their margin, meaning their percentage profit, down and still be okay. A lot of times you'll see margin lower in like a big truck shop as compared to a general repair shop. A general repair shop can very easily be in the 60 to 65% gross profit margin, whereas a big truck shop might be down in the 50 to 55% range. So quite a big difference, but the volume in those two same shops could be very similar. It just depends on what they're working on. A lot of times in big truck shops, the volume is much higher because the parts are more expensive and there's a lot more labor involved. So anyhow, it's important to understand what your target is, and that always comes from the owners or the managers. Ideally, pricing is set by the ownership, which is where you get your labor rates that are fixed into the operating system already, your markups, meaning like how much are we marking up certain parts to hit a certain percentage profit, and then what is our cost of labor, and all of those things need to be set by the ownership in the system so that whoever's pricing the jobs is working with some consistent data, meaning that you're going to have a consistent amount of cost per technician. You're going to have whatever the costs are of the parts, those are being put into the system, and then the system should be marking it up somewhat on its own. But the parts manager, the service advisor, the shop manager, whoever's pricing the jobs out and looking at the numbers of profitability, they need to have some flexibility and understanding of what these numbers are and how to increase them or decrease them. So why is profit margin important? Well, if you look at this is an example from a bigger seminar, but Shop A has a cost of $200. Let's just say it's a brake job. Parts and labor is $200. Shop B has the same cost, $200. And Shop A makes a 60% gross profit margin, meaning that their cost is $200 and they have a profit of $300, which is 60% gross profit margin. So the total sale is $500. That's a $300 profit to the shop. Where Shop B had the same costs, but they were only at 55% gross profit margin, which is only $444 sale, and the profit to the shop is only $244. So it's a difference of $56, right? So it doesn't sound like much on one ticket, but expand that over a couple hundred repairs, per month, and you've got a lot of money difference to the net profit of the shop. So what that margin is determined by ownership, so that whoever's selling the work can make sure that before they sell the job, that they're within the profit margin of the shop is targeting. But profit margin a lot of times in this industry is way overemphasized. There's a little bit more that needs to be known about how do we get to the net profit dollars. And that's what this particular video is about. Let's talk a little bit more beyond profit margin and look at some examples of why effective labor rate's important and why gross profit per hour is important, and not just look at profit margin. So, how do you get higher net profits? Well, you increase the volume of the shop, more cars, more work volume. You decrease expenses, or you increase profit margin, right? That's going to increase your net profit at the end of the month. Now, when we're looking at how do you increase the gross profit margin, make sure that you're charging the customer for everything the techs are doing. Don't give away diagnostic time. That'll kill you. And a lot of shops, like mine, we give away a half-hour inspection. It's something we use to inform our customers. It's one of those things that we give to the customer so that they have a full picture of the current situation in their shop, or a full picture of the current situation with their vehicle, but it's also a sales tool for us, right? So we can inform them, educate them on what we found on our inspection. We use that almost as a marketing expense, but if we're giving that away, it's going to throw off our gross profit margin because we're not charging anything for it. And then set the labor rate based on the labor costs. Like, a lot of shops make their labor rate based on what everybody else is in the area. And that's just, it's really a faulty way of doing it, because it's not basing it on any sort of numbers of how we're trying to get to the profit dollars that the ownership needs to keep the business going, expanding, and having profitability. So the only way to really set your labor rate is based on labor costs. And why are shop labor rates all very similar? Quite honestly, especially for those that actually know, how to do cost accounting and figure out what they need to charge in order to be profitable, is because all of our costs are very, very similar. I mean, technicians in an area are going to cost a shop so much. It might fluctuate $5 or $10 or $15 per hour depending on the shop, but for the most part, they're pretty close. The other way is to increase parts profit. Charging customers for all the parts and fluids on the vehicle. Make sure we have a line item for everything. And then set the markup based on costs, not on suggested retail. And what I mean by that is that whatever's on the invoice that you get from Napa or AutoZone or wherever you order your parts from, Factory Motor Parts or any, Worldpac, they're all going to put a suggested retail. Well, that's not anything. That's just an arbitrary number that they come up with. The retail price is whatever we set it at, because we're the one that's selling it to the consumer, and we need to sell it for enough to be profitable. So we should have control of these things when we're pricing out what a job is going to cost the customer before it's sold. Okay. Typical standards for profit margin: labor is going to be somewhere between 65 and 75% gross profit margin. Remember, margin's percentage. And then parts profit somewhere between 50 and 60% margin. And that's going to get you to your total gross profit about 55 to 65%. And general repair, that's pretty good. Okay. So that's enough about gross profit margin. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about gross profit per hour, because this is really important to look at on a job-to-job basis. Now, how is that calculated? When you look in your management system, the way it calculates it is profit dollars divided by labor hours. Okay? Profit dollars divided by labor hours. So basically, if you're taking profit dollars, that is not just labor. Okay? That's parts and labor profit. I say that for a reason, because when we go in and talk about effective labor rate, we're not talking about anything with parts. We're just talking about labor. But when we're talking about gross profit per hour, we're talking about profit dollars divided by labor hours. Okay, so that gives you a gross profit per hour. For example, 1 hour of labor sold, say the shop's at $150 an hour, at 67% gross profit margin, that's $100 in profit. Okay, and we have $150 in parts at 55% gross profit margin, that's $82 in profit. So we have a total gross profit per hour, because it was 1 hour sold, of $182.50 per hour. That's pretty good. It's a pretty good standard. And again, that's where these numbers come into play. Gross profit per on labor and gross profit margin on parts will get you, in that example, $182.50 per hour. Now, in my shop, our targets are somewhere between $180, ideally $200 of gross profit per hour. What's that number got to be in your shop? I have no idea. I'm not looking at the numbers. Okay, every shop's going to be a little bit different. Some are at 170, some are at 160, some are at 220. It just depends on what your target is, what your capacity is. There's a lot of other factors to play with in figuring out what your target should be. But that's how gross profit per hour works. Okay. Now, why is gross profit per hour important? Well, just like in the example here before, let's look at an hour of labor sold on tires. So let's just say, and again, I don't know what you charge for tires, but a fair amount of labor to install tires, let's say, is an hour. So in this same example, we have $150 in labor at 67% gross profit margin, okay, equals $100 profit. We have $800 in tires. That's retail price is $800. Okay, we made a 30% gross profit margin, which is $240 in profit. Okay, and that's about industry standard. Okay, you can easily make 35% gross profit margin on tires, no problem, all day long. It'd still be competitive. Okay, so between the two of these things, labor and parts, we have $340 gross profit per hour. Now, a lot of shops won't sell tires because it's only a 36% gross profit margin on the whole job. It's going to kill my gross profit. Now, if you have a shop that is paid on gross profit margin, yeah, I could see why advisors would not want to sell tires if they don't get their bonus, if they don't hit 60 or 58% gross profit margin. Because this big $950 job only produced $340 in profit. It is certainly going to knock down the gross profit margin for the week. But what I'm telling you is, who cares? We just made $340 in gross profit in 1 hour. You say, well, I don't have anything to compare that to. Well, let me show you. Here's an example, okay? So this is a fuel pump that was bid out, and let's say that it was 2.2 hours and for the job, right? And it was a Ford pump, okay? And you look at this job and you go, well, geez, it's only at 54% margin. Now, this is on a diesel truck, okay? It's actually a pretty good job, especially when you look at, yes, gross profit percentage, gross profit margin is only at 54.3%, but the gross profit dollars on this job is $717 in 2.2 hours. That's $326 per hour. Now, going back to our other example, it took us 2.2 hours to do this, probably plus diagnostic time, which we're going to have a gross profit per hour on that. But just to replace that fuel pump and fuel filter is $326 in 2.2 hours, okay? Going back to our tire example, in 1 hour, we made $340 per hour. Okay, so repair work is not necessarily more profitable than simple tires in that example. Let's look at another example. Well, here's an AC recharge. 67.6% GP. Oh, that's good. Not too bad. Some guys want to be a little higher than that on that, but not too bad. But look at the gross profit per hour. It's a 1 hour job. It's only $189. Now, it's a gravy job, and the technician's not going to be sitting there for an hour. Okay, actual Technician is going to be really profitable on that because they're probably going to be working on something else while that system is recharging. But the point is that we're only making $189 per hour of profit, but our profit margin looks really sweet. But don't get too excited about gross profit margin until you look at the gross profit per hour. Here's another example. There's a simple battery. Okay? Gross profit per hour, $313. It's only 0.4 to replace the battery. Okay? But $313 per hour, but it's only at 47% gross profit margin. And a lot of people will shy away from selling these types of things, or they price themselves out of the market because of the gross profit margin. Why be afraid of that? If we could make $300 per hour in profit, it's a good deal. Plus, again, the technician's probably going to take less than 4/10 to replace it, depending on the battery. And here's another example. Rear brakes. Oh, we all love brake jobs, right? We love brake jobs. It's gravy, especially the technicians. Tech gets paid an hour and a half for the brake job. Okay? 65.96, so almost 66% gross profit margin. But look at the gross profit per hour. It's only $196. I mean, that's still a pretty sweet job, right? Nobody's going to complain about that. But you can see the ideal scene isn't really known until you're looking at the gross profit per hour and looking at the gross profit margin and looking at what is competitive. You know, we have a general repair shop, but we also do a lot of light duty diesel. And a lot of the parts that we get come from the dealer. And like, you know, if we're going to change something like a DEF filter, right? Diesel exhaust filter that has to come from the Ford dealer. If I try and mark that up on my normal matrix, I'm going to be so priced out of the market, I'm never going to get those jobs. And if I do, the person doesn't know, they're not educated. And if they ever found out how much I was marking it up, they may never come back again. Maybe not. Maybe they don't care. They just love my service. But realistically, what we found is that there's a certain markup that we have to stick with on that type of a part. It's not going to be in our normal markup matrix. It's still higher than dealer list, believe me. Okay, but that job takes it's less than 2 hours. And even with our reduced markup, we're looking at like a $700 or $800 gross profit per hour on that. Okay, so, and totally competitive, totally within the range, customers happy, we're super happy, not a lot of risk on that job. Okay, those are sweet deals, but you look at that gross profit margin, the percentage on that type of a job, you're probably going to be somewhere around 35 or 45%. Doesn't look very good. Okay, so talking about this stuff, why is it important that the service advisors, if they're pricing stuff out before they sell it, the parts managers, if they're building the tickets or pricing parts, you know, in the system for the service advisors, the shop managers who's usually paid on net profit and gross profit, you got to understand what the difference is and what we can and can't mark up and how we can control these numbers to make the shop more profitable and where we need to be watching things, you know, to get that gross profit per hour up. It's really important to look at that and not passing over good jobs because they're low profit margin, but actually pay good on a gross profit per hour basis. So the other one that I wanted to talk about was this is a very misunderstood statistic that we follow in auto repair is effective labor rate. Now, effective labor rate is used in many different industries. It's used in plumbing, electricity. The dealerships started using it many years ago in auto repair, and so the independent has now picked it up. There's a lot of the softwares actually automatically calculate this number. Now, just like gross profit per hour for the whole week or the whole month, just like gross profit margin for the whole week or the whole month, the numbers that we're getting on effective labor rate are generally done on a reporting basis. So they're done on a daily or weekly basis coming out of the system. It is only based on what work is done. It does not tell you anything about shop efficiency. has everything to do with how the job was billed out originally, how it was estimated. And that's why parts managers, service advisors, shop managers need to understand this number and working at increasing it, or if you have a really good effective labor rate, maintaining it. Now, ideal scene of effective labor rate. What is it? 100%. So if your labor rate is $150 an hour, ideal scene is that your effective labor rate is $150 per hour, meaning that you're charging for every single labor that you're paying out. Because the way that effective labor rate is calculated is labor dollars sold divided by labor hours sold. I'm sorry, labor dollars sold divided by labor hours paid. Okay, so sold to the customer, but you're paying those labor hours to a technician. So labor dollars sold divided by labor hours sold. Okay, so for example, shop labor rate's $150 an hour. The effective labor rate is $123.53. Now, how do we get to that number? All right, here's how it works. So let's just say you have a labor of, now notice there's no parts here. We're not talking parts profit, parts sales, nothing. This is all labor. When you're dealing with effective labor rate, all you're talking about is the labor sold and the labor hours paid out. Okay? So here's an example. We have a $300 labor job. It was 2 hours for breaks. Now, just by the example I just gave you, that's 100%. 300 divided by 2 is $150. So that's 100% effective labor rate right now. Then we get to the next job for the day, and it's $150 of labor sold. And we did a diagnosis and an inspection. Well, it might be something like in my shop where we gave away a half an hour of inspection, but we charged them a full hour for the diagnosis. Okay? So we're below 150 on effective labor rate now. Now we have another one. We got 0 labor dollars because it was a labor warranty. We screwed something up. So we had to pay the technician 2 hours. Okay? But we got paid nothing. All right. Now we have $50 and an hour of labor. Parts warranty. Now what this would be is maybe you get paid by the parts house or Sancio or somebody pays you $50 when it should be $150, but you got 50 and the tech got paid an hour. Parts warranty. This is why it's very important for somebody who's in charge of the warranties with the parts houses that they chase these things up. Yes, it's only $50, but it's $50 more of labor dollars that we're collecting that's going to help the effective labor rate. It's going to help the gross profit per hour. It's going to help the gross profit margin. Okay, but it'll show up here. All right. Then we have the next job, $1,500, bigger job maybe, $1,500 in labor and 10 hours sold. That's again, 1,500 divided by 10 is 150. That's 100% effective labor rate, $150. Then we have another job, $100 for an oil change, and we pay the tech a half hour. Okay? So if you add all those labor hours up, that's 17 hours, and we collected $2,100 in labor dollars divided by labor hours, we have $123.53, which is, about a little over $26.47 under our posted labor rate of $150. Okay? So you've got to watch all of these numbers and making sure that we're getting paid for everything. So how do you improve the effective labor rate? And this is why I feel that parts managers, service advisors, shop managers should all be, somehow be in charge of watching these numbers. Whoever's billing the jobs out before they're sold or estimating the jobs before they're sold, they need to be in charge of this because there's nothing we can do about this after the fact. So first thing is charge labor for everything you can. Charge a premium on diag when appropriate. So sometimes you might need to charge. Remember, when you're diagnosing a car, you're not making money on parts. A lot of shops will charge time and a half on their labor rate when they're diagnosing something. So maybe they're at $100 or they're $200 an hour, and they charge $300 an hour for diagnosing diagnostic time because they're not making any money on parts. Sometimes you have to use a lot of equipment. You do a lot of looking up on the tech bulletin boards and all that. We pay for all that. You can charge a premium for that. Again, make sure you're charging it. You're setting it up before you charge the customer. You get their agreement before you do that. Okay. Don't over discount your services. Again, discounts can work great. It can, we use discounts in our shop. Don't over discount because that's going to affect your labor rate or your effective labor rate. Because if we discount labor, we're going to bring that down. Now you can say, well, okay, I'm not going to discount labor anymore. I'm just going to discount parts. Well, guess what? That's going to show up in your gross profit per hour. It's going to show up in your gross profit margin on parts. Okay, so there's really no way of hiding this stuff. You've got to use them all when you're building things out. There's really no cheating here. Okay, we're trying to get to higher net profit so that there's more prosperity for the shop, better pay for the employees, and all those things. Make sure that the service advisors are trained to sell testing time. Again, this is something that's given away a lot in shops. And realistically, you got to know when you tell a customer, hey, so this guy comes in the shop and they've been to 3 other shops and they haven't figured it out. Well, you better not start with an hour. It's like we might start with 3 or 4 hours. Hopefully the customer's so in demand for a fix at that point that they'll pay anything you tell them. But a lot of times you got to sell that stuff. So make sure the service advisors are well trained on explaining what we're doing. We're not just throwing a computer on and then magically it's going to tell us what's wrong. We know that's not the case. So service advisors need to understand how to sell testing time and sell enough of it. Ensure the techs stop when testing time is used. Again, if a technician spends an extra half an hour on testing, the shop didn't get commitment from the customer on that extra half an hour, but the technician wants it and the technician gets it. And if you're in any market where technicians get what they want, technicians are not always going to be very easy to work with on giving up their time, even though they should have stopped and said, hey, I need some more testing time. But, we know how that works. But again, if you have a policy in your shop, making sure that the technicians stop when they've used up their hour, their 2 hours, and then the service advisor can sell more. So you're not having to pay a technician more. And some shops are on the clock, and now it's literally robbing from the shop because there's no way to know. Okay, in some sort of a flat rate system, at least the shop knows if it's having to pay more. Okay. And then watch shop build hours versus tech paid hours. Again, this is another statistic that we watch in our shop, which is how many build hours we had versus tech paid hours. You would think that based on what I showed you on effective labor rate, that would show up, but it doesn't. It doesn't. We have to actually, what we want to see is how many hours the technicians flagged, and we want to see how many hours we build, and we have a formula for that as well. Okay. Does effective labor rate show if you're profitable? No, it doesn't. It shows a little bit. It shows if you're profitable on your labor side of things, but it doesn't show if you're profitable overall in the shop. Does it show if you have a quality problem? Nope. The only place it'll show a quality problem, the kind of quality problem I have, estimating and selling. Because the service advisors, parts managers, whoever's putting the estimates together are not looking at these numbers to make sure that everything is where it should be. That's where I would dig in if I'm looking at a low effective labor rate, low gross profit per hour. I'm going to go in there before I'm going out in the shop. Does it show you the service advisor's ability or willingness to sell time? Absolutely. Does it show tech efficiency? Nope. Does it show sales efficiency? Nope. Doesn't show any of that. Okay. It's only one of the gauges in looking at the overall profitability of the shop. Okay. So basically, the thing that I wanted to emphasize here in this shorter video, the other video you can find on YouTube that has the full version of this seminar, where it gives a lot of definitions and details that I didn't go over right here. Look, these are just, the statistics are just gauges. It's just like driving a car. You're looking at the gas gauge. You're looking at the temperature. You're looking at the RPMs. Okay. They're just gauges. They're not going to they're not going to tell you exactly what the bottom line dollars are. What matters is the bottom line net profit. And these are some of the gauges that we can use to increase the overall profitability of the shop. Okay. There's a lot of ways to get to higher net profits. You can look at gross profit margin. You can look at gross profit per hour, and you can look at the effective labor rate. And those are the three key numbers that I'm always looking at. And then I can dig in further: labor profitability, parts profitability, how are we building things out to find a solution. But most of the time when service advisors, parts managers, shop managers, what they're dealing with are things that they can actually control. And that's how much we're charging the customer and how much we're selling the job for, knowing what the profits are going to be on all those numbers. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at Victory Team Building Group. Thank you.